Now, I know what you're thinking clicking on this video, but don't worry guys, I'm not going to start a YouTube series on my channel talking about all the shit in the Division that I do not like playing with. The game has way too many things that I do actually like, and honestly, I'd rather focus on those things. But a lot of people have come up to me and asked me if I like the 6-piece Tactician for either a healer build or a damage skill build, a sticky bomb build or something. And my short answer is, nah, not really. It isn't that the Classified Tactician is a bad gear set per se, and with the right setup it can definitely result in some of the strongest skill builds in the game. But the 6-piece, in my opinion, has way too many walls and barriers that overcomplicate the set, make it more difficult to use, and ultimately prevent the user from getting a lot of value from it. I honestly think that going with the old 4-piece Tactician Vigorous Inventive setup, or even with the 5-piece and then just Vigorous, if you don't play healing skills at all, both of those setups are, in my opinion, much stronger than just going with the 6-piece. And today, I wanted to go over why I think this is, why I think that you shouldn't play with a 6-piece Tactician. Before we get to the 6-piece though, and before we really dive into what it does, I think it's also important that we look at the 4-piece, because the 4-piece did undergo some pretty significant changes back when patch 1.8 launched. In the past, of course, this gear set would give you 0.2% more skill power for every bullet that you or your teammates would land on an enemy. And that would go all the way up to 30%, so that's a total of 150 bullets that you would have to hit to reach that. But now, it is a flat 1% increased skill power per bullet, which means that you only have to land a total of 30 bullets. That sounds like an insane buff, but the bullets of your teammates, they do not count anymore. So it's only your own bullets, and then the bullets that your auto turret skill can shoot, but we'll get to that in just a second. This changes the gear set in a lot of different ways, of course, because for solo players this buff suddenly becomes a lot more useful, because they only have to shoot 30 bullets, and they don't have to rely on their teammates to do that anymore. They should be able to reach max stacks with half a magazine now, so it seems like a buff at first glance. And then for group players, I'm not really sure what this is, to be honest. I'm not sure if it's a nerf or a buff. I don't really think it's either. It just forces the skill user to also shoot his own weapon a little bit more to get more value out of the 4-piece, but it's still really easy to get those 30% stacks. So more than anything else, I'd say it's a change of playstyle for the group players. Still though, the 4-piece is pretty strong, there's no doubt about that. And then the turret, as I said, it does also help you out if you're playing with the turret skill. However, because the turret's rate of fire is really high, it would of course be pretty overpowered if it would give you a flat 1% skill power per bullet hit. So the turret still only gives you 0.2% extra skill power. So the turret actually has to land 5 bullets for your skill power to be increased by 1%. But as you can see here, it still helps quite a bit. Anyway, that is the whole 4-piece for you. That's the new reworked 4-piece. Then we have the 5-piece, which is a little bit weak in my opinion, because it adds 5% skill power and 5% skill haste. I think the reason for it being this weak is probably because the 2-piece with the 15% skill haste is so strong in comparison. I've talked about this before in previous videos about how 15% skill haste for a 2-piece is quite a lot. And this might be something that the developers did to compensate for that. They just slapped a rather weak 5-piece on top of it instead of nerfing the 2-piece, and that's, that also kind of solves the problem if everybody was going to run with the 6-piece. But of course the 5-piece is not where the problem is. I would completely be fine with this if the 6-piece was strong enough. But the 6-piece isn't strong enough. The 6-piece has the ability to increase that 30% extra skill power that you can get by landing bullets, the thing that we talked about with the 4-piece. It can increase that to 60%, so that after landing 60 bullets, your skill power can be increased by 60%. However, there are a few pitfalls there. You cannot get the 60% skill power right away. First, you have to reach that 30% skill power from the 4-piece, and then you have to use a skill while you're at that 30% skill power. Only after using a skill at the 30% cap, that is when you'll be able to reach 60% stacks for your next skill. This doesn't sound too bad, it just means that you can't get the 60% skill power with the first skill, but the 60% cap is a one-time thing, so to speak. So that means that if you use a skill after you unlock that 60% cap, so to speak, the cap goes back down to 30%, whether you actually got the 60% stacks or not. And then, to get back to 60% stacks, you have to repeat the process. You first have to use a skill at 30% stacks, and only then, for just one time, you can increase your skill power up to 60% extra with 60% stacks. And this kind of forces you to use your skills not only in a very specific way, because basically one of your skills is the skill that you're going to be using at 30% stacks. You'll sacrifice this skill, so to speak, to raise the cap for the other skill. And then, only after landing 60 bullets on a target, which is quite a lot if you're a skill power player and you have cooldowns that are about 10 seconds short, you can use one of your skills at 60% stacks, after which the cap will drop down to 30% and you have to repeat the process. So if you look at it this way, you're always spending one skill at 30% skill power and 90 bullets landed on a target to have one skill get that 60% skill power bonus value. This means that you can never use skills when you're not at 30% stacks, because otherwise the cap will not be raised to 60 for your next skill. And it also means that after the cap is raised to 60, you'll have to spend a lot of your time shooting your gun, depending of course on what type of gun you have, to get to 60 stacks to even get the value. And if you look at it, you know, that way, at that point you are literally on purposely not using your skills on a skill build so that the next time you use your skills they are a little bit stronger. And that seems very, very counterintuitive to me. It does get a little bit better though, because there's also a second part to the 6-piece that I haven't really talked about yet, and that is that if you use a skill at 60%, there's also a chance that the stacks will not go back down to 0, but that they instead go back down to 30, and then you can use bullets to stack up from 30 to 60%. The chance that this happens, it scales with electronics, much like the Reclaimer thing, where the support station gives you back an instant cooldown when it gets destroyed. When you're at 9000 electronics, this chance is 100%, so for the 6-piece tactician builds, of course you're gonna go 9000 electronics, so you're always going to go back down to 30 stacks instead of 0 when you use a skill at 60% stacks. There is another catch to this though, because of course this sounds pretty good, because it means that you would just have to stack up to 60% once, and then from that moment on, you would always have the 30% extra skill power as a base. But there's a catch to this that makes it a lot more difficult and a lot more annoying to use. And that is that it only works if you use a different skill than that you used last time. So you can't ever use the same skill twice in a row. Otherwise, your stacks are going to go back down to 0. So if we look at it all the way from the start, if you want to build this up, so to speak, this is how you're going to have to do it. You have two skills here. You have the first aid and you have the support station. The first thing you do is you stack up to 30% stacks. Then you use the first aid to raise the cap. Then, because you raised the cap, you can stack up all the way to 60%, so you have to shoot 60 bullets at an opponent. And then, at 60 stacks, you are only allowed to use the support station, or else the stacks will be reset back down to 0 and not 30%. If you use the support station, that's the right way to do it. The stacks will go down to 30%, but then, the next time that you reach 60% stacks, you have to use the first aid. Because otherwise the stacks will go back down to 0. And after that you have to use the support station again, and then you have to use the first aid again. And you have to juggle the usage of both of these skills around and around to get value out of that 60% cap. If you mess up once, if you don't do it the right way once, then the stacks will go back all the way down to 0, and the cap will be lowered again to 30%. You can probably imagine that with some skills this might not be such a big deal, because you would very easily be able to juggle those skills, but a lot of different skill builds, they run with the support station or the first aid, for example, or they run with two skills that have cooldowns that are not very similar. You know, you might have a very lengthy cooldown and a very short cooldown on one of the skills. And in that case, you're always handicapped by the skill that has the longest cooldown, because you always have to wait for that skill to give you your cooldown back. And in the case with the support station, the cooldown doesn't even start until the support station is destroyed. So if you truly want to get value out of this, you're pretty much forced to prematurely blow up the support station every single time, or otherwise you're going to have to wait a very, very long time before you can use your first aid again. It's very simple. You put all of these mechanics together and you put them in a real world scenario. Either one of two things is going to happen. Either you're almost not going to get any value out of that 60% cap increase, because not only do you have to land a lot of bullets to get there, but when you're on 45% stacks, just to name an example, and you have to pop your heal, it's very simple. You have to pop your heal, otherwise your teammate dies, right? You don't want to be waiting on that. So either you're not going to get a lot of value out of the 60% cap, or you're that player who on purposely is not going to use his skills to try and get greedy and try and get more stacks before using their skills. And as a healer or as a player with high damage skills, either of these situations is just not a good thing to have, especially not in PvP. Because as a healer, you need to pop your heals as often as possible, because if you're waiting to get stronger heals, and not using your heals on purposely just for that, you're going to end up healing for a lot less because you're using your skills less often. And if you're a player with damage skills, let's say a sticky bomb and a seeker mine or whatever, then waiting for your skills is also not a good thing because the majority of your damage is coming from those skills. So in that case, you know, what are you doing? You're only getting a little bit of extra damage or a little bit of extra healing, and you're trading that away for not using your skills all the time. And yeah, it is really only a little bit more healing or a little bit more damage, because with this unoptimized tactician build that I used for testing, which is sitting at 9,000 electronics, which is the bare minimum needed to get the 6-piece to work consistently, with this amount of electronics and the 30% stacks we have from the 4-piece, I'm already sitting around the 450,000 skill power. I'm not quite there yet, but I am pretty close, and we all know what happens at 450,000 skill power. Because that's the point where the soft cap for skill power kicks in. Beyond that point, increasing your skill power has very little effect on the strengths of your skills. The curve is pretty steep if you ask me, so this whole tactician build, with all these barriers and all these specific uses of skills, it might have been worth the hassle. It might have been good on paper, it might have been, the payoff might have been worth it, but honestly, the skills, even if you do it correctly, even if you get to that 60% stacks, the skills simply aren't that much stronger, even when you pull it off correctly all the time. The difference between 30% stacks and 60% stacks is simply way too small. Don't believe me? Okay, then let's have a look at this optimized tactician build where we have 30% stacks, which results in 460,000 skill power. How strong are the skills going to be, you ask? Well, the first aid defibrillator ally heal, that's going to sit around 412,000 HP. The immunizer, that's going to heal you for 16,000 HP a second. The BFB, that's going to hit for almost 1.3 million. Seems pretty strong, right? But now let's increase the stacks from 30% to 60% to pretend that we always have the 6-piece active. Let's see what happens. We have 555,000 skill power. The ally heal on the defibrillator first aid is only 443,000 HP. The support station HP a second, 17,200. The BFB damage, almost 1.4 million. Sure, okay, there's a difference, there's an increase, but is that difference really worth all the hassle that you have to go through in order to get the 60% stacks? In my opinion, definitely not, especially not if you're not using your skills on purposely to try and get those stacks in the first place. You're much better off spamming a sticky bomb that does almost 1.3 million damage than waiting for your stacks to hit that magical 60% stacks number and then have a sticky bomb that does 1.4 million damage. Sure, it might be the difference between one-shotting and not one-shotting, but most cases that's definitely not worth it, and especially not if you look at the healing abilities. So would I say that Tactician is useless then? No, not at all. But if I were to run Tactician's dispatch, I would run it in a different way. I would run with the 4-piece, then get a vigorous chest piece, and then get an inventive backpack to go with it. The vigorous chest piece makes you a lot tankier in PvP, especially if you have your own healing abilities, and well, if you have a tactician build, you usually are going to have at least one healing ability, and then because of the vigorous, you're overhealed all the time, and thus inventive, which gives you 15% skill power while you're on full health, is pretty much active all the time. This is pretty much the build we had in patch 1.6 before the classified gear sets came out. It was pretty strong back then, but right now, if I'm being honest, if we compare this setup to some of the 6-piece classified gear sets we have right now, I think that it's still not strong enough to be worth running. Some of the other 6 pieces are just far too strong in comparison, like for example the Reclaimer, which can push out a much stronger support station at a far lower skill power amount, due to the 100% healing speed bonus. So yeah, something needs to be done. I'm not going to make any specific suggestions and just leave that up to the developers, because what I would want for this game is not always what someone else would want, and I'm pretty tired of the stop ruining the game, Merkel comments. So yeah, I'm not even going to suggest anything. Just wanted to let you know why I don't really like the 6-piece bonus and why I will probably not be using Tactician's Authority until some changes are made. Now you can take my opinion for that, you can follow the advice, or you can leave it all be. That's all up to you. That's all that this video was. Now I know a lot of you have also asked me to cover other gear sets, like I did with the Tactician right here. But something that I do not want to do is just make videos on everything that I do not like to use and give reasons why I don't like certain things. So What I'm going to be doing instead is probably make another one of those gear set tier list videos where I'll just go over every gear set very quickly and then rank them from tier 1 to tier 4 or my own personal tier list, and then, you know, talk about their strengths and weaknesses. That way I can kind of cover everything, let you know which sets I think are the best and which ones are the worst, without coming off as someone who is always looking for something new to complain about. Because really, I'm not complaining, guys. I only made this video because so many people kept asking me to give my opinion on the new Classified Tactician. I hope we're on the same line there. As always, I will see you all later, or like they say in the Netherlands, zie je later.